It is rolling. Give me your name and your position on the aircraft.
My name is Bruce Alshouse. I was a tail gunner on the aircraft.
How many missions did you fly?
I flew 25 missions.
All as a tail gunner?
All as a tail gunner, every one of them.
Do this. What was the purpose of a tail gunner?
Purpose of a tail gunner was to defend the aircraft from the rear portion of the, from tail attacks, Germans coming through.
But the early B-17s didn't have a tail gunner.
That's right.
Why did they decide to do that?
Because so many of the enemy aircraft came in and sat back there and just riddled it. There was nothing to shoot back with. The top turret gunner, if he tried to shoot, would shoot the fin right off the airplane of the B-17.
What about the ball turret?
Ball turret couldn't get it up high enough. So there was a vulnerable position for a fighter to get behind a B-17 and just continue shooting.
How did it feel to be the guy whose responsibility it was to fill that vulnerable position?
There wasn't anyone back there at that time. They didn't have a tail gunner. So
but once you started,
oh
you
yeah,
were the guy plugging that hole.
Actually, for quite some time, we got a lot of tail attacks, but pretty soon the German aircraft did mostly nose attacks because they used their speed plus the speed of our aircraft to get in and get out of there without getting shot up themselves. We used to get tail attacks sometimes when we had heavy contrails. They'd sneak up into contrails, you wouldn't even know they were there, and they'd shoot you up then.
What was it like going on a mission and being way back there? Only person you can talk to is the pilot. And you're well removed from everybody else in the plane.
Well, it was a lonesome feeling. It was. There's no doubt about that. Several times I'd get a hold of somebody to make sure that all the engines were functioning correctly because I had my back to the front of the aircraft. I didn't know what was going on up there at all. So I get on the interphone and find out what was going on. But it was a lonesome place. There was nobody there besides you. But it was no different than anybody else as far as being in a vulnerable position, really.
Were you ever attacked up close?
Oh, yes.
Describe
it. Yes, we were attacked by German fighters from the rear. Came through and broke off down underneath us. And I can't say I actually ever saw a pilot's face. I don't believe they were that close to me. Or maybe I was shooting at the aircraft and wasn't paying much attention to the pilot. And I had to try to keep my eye on him, on the plane.
Describe what you as a gunner had at your disposal to defend the plane.
Well, I had twin 50 caliber Browning machine guns mounted on one mount, and I had a piece of armor plating in front of me, probably about that wide, and I had to reach around that, and there was spade grips on the machine guns, and you grab those, and you grab those like that, and use the gun this way, up, down. All you had for a sight was a ring and a post, like this, and that's about all you could use back there. Probably one of the worst parts of it was the cold weather back there, because all the air came through the waist guns and came right on straight back through you, and then on out the tail. But
you were in a scrunched up position. just saying about how cold it was.
Yes.
And I was asking you about your position. You
Mm-hmm.
scrunched up.
Yeah. I don't know if I could describe it, but you kneeled when you were a tail gunner. You had a couple little pads to put your knees on each side, and then you sat on like a bicycle seat. That's the position you were in for, well, sometimes 7 and 8 hours in that same position without moving. Uh, as far as the ammunition goes that fed into the guns, there was an ammunition box on either side, and they were made from plywood. And there were 50 caliber rounds in there, and they were linked together. And originally they were set up as two armor piercing, two balls, and then one incendiary. And the one incendiary was supposed to direct you as to where your shots were going. We found later that it didn't work too well because the incendiary bullet would burn out faster than the armor piercing or the other type of ammunition.
Hold on just a second, like that. Since you had stumbled on that, let's do that again. You're getting to the essential point that I want you to.
Okay.
Okay. So, how was the round order sequence laid out?
It was armor piercing. There was two armor piercing. There was two. Oh boy, what were they?
Wasn't it?
Sorry.
Two armor piercing, two incendiary. No, two explosive.
That's right. Yeah.
Two explosive, and then one train.
One incendiary. Yeah.
Let's start again.
All right. The ammunition was laid out to enter each gun from the outside in, and there would be two armor piercing, two incendiaries, and one tracer. And the tracer, of course.
Not two incendiaries, two explosives.
Yeah.
Was that correct? I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So go ahead, wipe. I'm sorry. Let's start that again. So how was the order of the rounds?
The order of rounds was in the ammunition was two armor piercing, two incendiary explosive type shells, and one tracer. But the tracer we found out was not a very good indication of where your bullets were going to, because the tracer, as it went through the air, it burned out. In other words, it got lighter. It was not a true picture of where you were shooting, so we couldn't depend too well on the tracers.
How did you compensate for that?
You couldn't. There's nothing you could do about it, really. The only thing you had to do was try and lead the target, and the lead was the biggest and most important part of it. If the plane was going away from you, you had to lead it, going one direction or the other, unless it was coming right directly at you. And then you could fire point blank, of course.
Describe an incident where you were attacked and where you may have had a kill. I don't know if you ever had one, but describe that.
No, well, there's two fighters. I think they were ME-109s, as I remember it now. Came in from about 5 o'clock. They were coming into our formation, and as they fired, I could see their cannons winking, and they broke off, and I was firing at them, and I could see that I thought I was firing right into them. One of those two dropped off and started smoking and went away. After we got back to the base from the mission, I put in a credit for a claim. I found out after there was another B-17 in the vicinity that was closer to it, and this gunner was firing at it also. And the rule of thumb was if you were the closest plane to it and it went down, you got the credit for it. So I was not credited with that. Actually, it didn't make that much difference to me. I was more interested in getting back alive.
What was that again?
I said that really didn't interest me whether I got credit for it at all at that time because I was more interested in getting back alive than any other part of it.
And of course, you got the credit for the mission.
Oh yes, definitely. I had to get credit for a mission.
So if you came down to between a credit for a, how did you view it that way?
For the mission, as opposed to a credit for the aircraft, I'd go for the mission. That's one less. 24 more after that or before that or whatever.
You were shot down on a practice mission on the third day of your tour.
Yes. We were scheduled to go to Bremen. The whole group was, and our crew went out to our aircraft, which at that time was Laden Maiden, and we got into the aircraft as I remember it, getting ready to take off, and the pilot called back and said the mission had been scrubbed because the weather had gotten real bad over the continent and we wouldn't be able to go. So we went back to the barracks as a crew, went back to the barracks and were there probably an hour or so, and we got word that we were to go on a practice mission, fly a practice mission, and they were going to practice Pathfinder bombing, they called it, which was bombing through the clouds and using, well, in simple English now it'd be radar, although we didn't know what radar was at that time. Or at least I didn't. Anyhow, they called us back out on a flight line. We went back to Leyden Maiden and found that it was still had the bomb sitting in it from the mission we did not go on. And they didn't want to send us up in that, so they hurried us over to another aircraft called, damned if I know, number 2. We got into that and we found out that the guns were out of the receivers, the guts of them, and were sitting up in the nose, all 10 guns. And we didn't have time to get into it, to putting them in where they belonged, except for, I think we had 4 guns in position. And we took off, we climbed up over England and out over the North Sea. And there was several planes. There was probably 50, 60 aircraft. We were flying number 2 off the right wing of the lead ship. Because we didn't have any guns, the pilot said, you might as well sit in the radio room where it's warmer. It was a cold day. And we sat in there, and we were sitting on the floor. And all of a sudden, we heard our bombardier holler over the microphone or the interphone that there were fighters in the vicinity. And about that time, as we were sitting down along the right fuselage, we could hear a zip, 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 and we looked up and it was riddled. Our fuselage on the right side was riddled over our heads. And then we looked out and found out that the number 3 engine, which was the inboard engine on the right wing, was on fire. And of course we all buckled up our chutes because we had no idea what was going to happen after. And the pilot pulled away out of formation so as not to endanger the other aircraft. And then the pilot said to bail out because he thought we were going to blow. The whole wing was on fire then. So we had the bomb bay doors open, and which was very convenient to the radio compartment. We went to the radio compartment and started bailing out, and I was the last one out of that particular area. I bailed out, and thank God we had had training, not on bailing out at high altitude, but at least we knew what to do, and we went out without any hesitation. Because if I had waited longer, I don't think my chute would open before I hit the water. But about the time my chute opened and I felt the tug on the chute, my feet went into the water, and I went down and down and down and down. And I thought I'd never come back up, but I finally got back up. And it was about 4 in the afternoon, and the sun was starting to drop down on the horizon. and the water was rough. It was real high waves. Uh, I didn't have any idea that we could ever be picked up. And I know at times I treaded water. I was not a great swimmer anyhow. I tread water the best I could, and I never thought I'd get picked up. And I thought, well, this is it. This is the way death comes. And so I let myself go, and I go under. But then I come back up again. Something in me decided I should live. And I came back, and all of a sudden I saw a boat, like a smaller 100-foot boat, go by me quite a ways away. And I hollered and waved, and they waved back and kept going. And I couldn't understand why they didn't come over there. And I found out after about it. But anyhow, I stayed in the water and I kept hollering and hollering. And about that time, it must have been about 20, 25 minutes. Uh, One of the boats, I found out after there were 6 motor torpedo boats from the British Navy on their way across the North Sea to raid German shipping that night. And they had seen our activity up in the air. And he spread them out, the commander did, and tried to pick us all up. And they heard me hollering, and although they couldn't see me, I was in the sun from them. They followed my voice and gradually came on over and threw down a rope ladder for me. And then 2 of the crewmen from their ship came down to help me up onto the deck. I can remember thrashing, and I knocked one of them into the water, which I was sorry for. But when I hit the deck, I kind of passed out. I was done then for a while. And then I woke up. I was down below by the engine room where it was warm. And I had a whole bunch of blankets on me, and I was shaking. And there was 2 crewmen working on my feet because I couldn't feel my feet, and they were rubbing my feet, and they kept rubbing them until I finally got circulation coming back in there. Then I found out my bombardier and my radio operator were on. No, excuse me, my flight engineer were on the same boat. They had gotten picked up by the same boat, but we we uh, we had 10 people on board. The pilot rode the aircraft into the North Sea, hoping he could skip it and maybe put the fire out with the water that he hit when he hit a wave. And he skipped it and pulled up, and he looked down. It was still on fire, so at that time he dove it in. And fortunately, he was able to. He was a small man, able to get out of his hatch, and he came up. And there was a lot of oxygen bottles floating around, and so on. And he grabbed a hold of a couple of those. I found out that's where that ship that went by me, they were going on up. They had been directed to go to the wreckage, and they picked him up. And they picked up. My co-pilot was dead. He had hit his head he went out the nose hatch, and he'd severed his head, I should say, on the neck, by hitting one of our bomb bay doors. And it was just barely hanging on to what was left of it. They picked up the navigator, but he had drowned and they couldn't revive him. So they had 2 bodies there, and then there were 3 bodies they never could find. My 2 waist gunners and a ball 3rd gunner. They never found those. And we went with them that night on the raid German shipping. Fortunately for me and the rest of us, it was too rough to launch a torpedo anyhow that night. And so they turned around about 4 a.m. and went back to Yarmouth, where they took us off and took us to the RAF base, or the naval base, for inspection there. But then we never got credit for that mission.
Your last mission was the infamous March 6, 1944 Berlin mission.
Yes, that was.
Why did you get picked for that? That was your 25th mission. I didn't think you got a tough mission.
Well, to that time, until I've heard differently, I never thought you had a choice. And I had pneumonia while I was over there, and I missed 3 missions with my regular crew that we made up after this we got shot down. So I flew my last 3 missions with John Harrison's crew, whose tail gunner had been injured in combat, and I flew my last 3 missions with him. And to get it over with, the 25th mission, that was it. I wanted to go. Nobody asked me whether I wanted to go or not, so I went.
What was that mission like?
That was a rough mission. That scared me half to death. John Harrison was. We were flying high squadron, and there were 9 ships in our high squadron stacked up three, three, and three. And after the first fighter pass, there were 4 of us left out of the 9, and both our wingmen were gone, and a couple of other guys moved up into that position. And we got shot up pretty bad on the way back. There were a lot of holes in the aircraft. Fortunately, there were none in the tail. Uh, I don't know if that crew ever would have flown with me again. I think I called the flight engineer a half a dozen times every hour to find out if everything was running all right up there, because they were falling like flies. We lost. We set up 31 that day, and we lost 15 out of the 31. We had 16 back, and I was glad it was my last mission.
Was that your toughest mission?
I think it was. I think it was definitely the toughest. We lost the most that day.
Did you witness planes going down?
Did I see aircraft go down? Yes, I saw a lot of aircraft go down. A lot of them. You get through firing, and nothing in the area. You start looking around, and you see parachutes going down, and you see aircraft going down. You see them pulling up and falling off on the right wing, and starting to go down, barreling down.
Did you ever see did you ever see a collision or a plane burst into the flak floor?
I've seen them burst from flak, yes. Because there weren't any fighters around, it had to be flak. I'd get a direct hit on them and they'd blow up. And you'd hope for chutes to come out, and most of the time you'd see a few chutes come out, but sometimes you wouldn't see any. I never saw a mid-air collision. No, I know there were some, but I didn't see any of those.
How'd you feel after you finished 25 missions?
After 25, I was very relieved, ready to go home. They asked me if I wanted to stay over there and become a gunnery officer on the ground and probably get a commission, but I thought I'd rather go home, so I went home. I went home and trained crews to go back overseas again.
How were you received at home?
With open arms. It was really, it was fairly early in the war yet. This was in April that I got home of 44. And, well, you couldn't go in a bar and buy a drink. Somebody'd buy a drink every time. Of course, with every drink, you shoot down a couple more fighters. And, no, it wasn't that bad. But a newspaper got a hold of it, and they had me come down and be interviewed and all that kind of thing, and publish something in the paper about it.
What did you think of B-17
Well, I thought it was a very dependable aircraft. I was only 19 when I was flying it, and I was quite gullible anyhow, and naive. And I thought, well, boy, this thing's gotten me back over there and back, and it's just going to continue doing it. There's no two ways about it. It's going to get me back. And after seeing some of those B-24s get hit, they were flying near us. I was elated that I was in a B-17. I was elated. I saw a B-24 one time flying right off about 5 o'clock, get hit. In my recollection, it looked like somebody had taken a skill saw and gone right down the fuselage, and the left wing just dropped away like there was nothing there to hold it. The poor plane, the poor guys in the plane, they went down with it. But the Germans liked that aircraft at that time. That was earlier in the war. But I thought the B-17 was probably as good as any plane they ever made.
Did you fly any missions during Big Week just before your last mission? Big Week was the end of February of 44. It was the largest U.S. bomber force ever assembled to that time, 16 combat wings, over 1,000 bombers, over 800 fighters. It was the first time a 1,000 bomber force, a U.S. bomber force headed for Germany with 12 targets. Were you on that mission?
Yes. I don't remember the name of the mission though, but in February I flew every one that we flew. We had no off time at that time.
What was it like to be, you had a view back through a bomber stream?
It was awesome. To use the young expression, it was awesome. I mean, you could just see them for miles and miles coming. And then you try to look forward, and there would be miles and miles coming out of the target. And it was just awesome. It really was. It was something that you'll never forget.
What was it like to get up in the morning and have breakfast on a day that you knew you were flying? First off, is it true they served you fresh air?
Uh-huh.
What was it? Well, describe breakfast on a mission.
On a mission? Oh, it was usually battery acid, we called it. It was grapefruit juice. I never should have drank any because I had a nervous stomach anyhow, and it always bothered me. But and then it was powdered eggs, and that's about all I can remember. I'm sure there was other. There was probably toast. I don't remember a lot about what we ate. I really don't. But I remember a lot of pancake times when the pancakes were cooked the night before and then steamed all night long to keep warm, and you put your fork in it and the water would come pouring out of it. I remember those. But frankly, I used to get upset stomach before the mission while we were out at the aircraft, and I might have to go over behind the aircraft and get rid of that battery acid I had.
All right, so before you go out to the
Alshouse interview, 17.
Pre-flight briefings, what are they like?
Well, you go in and you sit on a wooden bench. As a crew, you sat together usually. You'd sit there, there's a lot of conversation going on, talking to each other. The commanding officer would come in, somebody'd holler attention, everybody'd jump up and stand at attention. He'd come up in front, welcome us there, give us a brief little talk about what we were going to do that day, but we still didn't know what the target was. But then they pulled back he'd have I believe it was the operations officer or briefing officer, whatever you want to call him. He'd pull back a curtain that they used to have over the maps of Germany and France and so on. And then there'd be a red ribbon from Thorpe Abbott's all the way to the target. And of course, then there would be a lot of comments and a lot of mumbling about each other about this looks like an easy one or it looks like a real rough one. Or, then they'd give you an idea of how many flak guns you'd be going by, or how many fighters were in the area. They give you the time that you went on your bomb run, your ETA, your estimated time of arrival at the target, and then your ETA to come home again. And then they'd hack you with your wristwatch. In other words, the fellow would make sure that everybody's wristwatch in the room was on the same minute, and that was usually the end of briefing. And then we'd jump in the trucks, take us out the aircraft.
But wasn't there always, before a briefing ended, or just after a briefing, wasn't there always an opportunity to consult with sky pilots?
Describe with sky pilots?
Ministers, chaplains.
Oh, yes, very definitely. Yeah, there would be a Catholic priest usually, and a Protestant priest, Protestant minister, excuse me. And if you wanted to go to church, you go over and they'd say a few prayers over you. And I don't think there were too many fellows that didn't do that most of the time. I know I did. There are no atheists. They always said there's no atheists in the foxholes. I don't think there are any atheists in the airplane either. But I think it was a great help to have a chaplain talk to you prior to your mission and try to make your mind at ease a little bit. We had good ones.
What about post-flight briefings? You come back and you all sit down and
Post-flight, we all come back into a room and sit down, and there'd be a interrogation officer there, and the whole crew would sit around, and then he'd start asking questions about see anything unusual today. For instance, if you saw, I saw a red flag several times. Well, the whole crew did actually, and I never did know the semblance why it was red, but it was red. They'd ask you different questions. Anything unusual? Did you see this plane go down? Did you see that plane go down? Did you see any chutes come out of this plane? I can remember telling our crew told a briefing officer one time, and for the first time I think, about a German fighter dropping a bomb down about 500 feet below his fighter plane on a cable. It getting up in front of us, and then coming at the formation, you could see this bomb coming through the air. And the purpose was to break up the formation so that they could peck away at you and get the stragglers, and you didn't have the concentrated firepower that you would have if you stayed in formation. And that's the first time. I only saw it one time, and our crew reported at that time. I'm sure a lot of the other planes did too. But I never heard anybody talk about that after the war, and I wondered if it was a myth. Maybe I didn't see it, but I thought I saw it. And it was verified by several other people too.
Did you ever see or can you describe what happened when the crew didn't make it? What did they do? What was the routine, the activity that went on in your process?
Well, usually the adjutant, who was the ground officer, you might say, of a squadron, would come over with two or three supply personnel, and they would inventory and put all the belongings from one of the missing crewmen and put it in a barracks bag and take it back over to supply. I don't know, I never did know what they did with it after. I'm sure the personal belongings were sent back to the family, and I imagine the clothing was reissued to someone else at a later time. We used to have that happen in our particular barracks several times, where a crew would not come back, and they would come over and clean out whatever the fellow had. But it never really affected us too much. We missed them. But we knew there was another mission the next day, so what's the sense of getting all shook up about it? So we went on our way.
Final questions. Who was your pilot?
My original pilot was John Gossage. After we were shot down, he was a pretty nervous man after that. He was a little older than the rest of us. He took it a lot worse. They made him a co-pilot, and we were assigned a pilot by the name of Donald Moody, Moede, who was a great young man, and we really had a good pilot, and we really were very grateful that he took us. We had to pick up two new waist gunners, ball turret gunner, another flight engineer.
Did you ever fly with Cowboy?
Never did. He was a kind of a hero to us younger fellows over there. You had to have a hero when you were a kid, anyhow. And because the name of Cowboy, that rang a bell with a lot of folks. He was always my hero, and I never got to know Cowboy real well until some of these reunions came up. Now I'm real close with him. And my pilot, incidentally, Don Moody, was one of Cowboy's best friends overseas, and he was killed in a P-51 accident here after the war back here in the States.
Did you know and help him? What's your take on Rosie Rosenthal?
I only knew of him over there. He was in a different squadron. I've been with him at some of our reunions. He's a quite modest man. I think he's a fine gentleman. I don't think he'd ever say anything bad about anybody. And he was a hero. He was a hero of the 100th Bomb Group. A lot of people relate to the 100th as soon as they hear of Rosie Rosenthal.
And Harry Crosby.
Harry Crosby kept the 100th name out in front of a lot of people who inquired about World War II, 8th Air Force, 100th Bomb Group. And when that was mentioned, Harry would publicize the 100th as much as he could. He wrote our little newspaper that we have, the Splasher. He wrote it for 25 years and did a great job on that. And we don't see as much of Harry anymore or hear as much because he's writing a book again, and he doesn't get around like he used to.